So what does it mean when you cross your fingers? In my life, that has always meant that I'm hoping this thing that we're talking about will actually happen. But what does it mean if you cross your fingers behind your back? All my life it has meant that I was swearing something or saying something, telling people it was true, and it was really false or a lie. Somehow, crossing your fingers behind your back gave you permission to tell the fib or the lie. So I looked it up, crossing your fingers behind your back, and one explanation was that it was like making the sign of the cross to absolve you of the sin that you were committing, of lying. And it was often emphasized that this was a behavior of children, and it definitely is a childish behavior. But what it says to me is that people will go to some length to avoid feeling bound by their promises, to avoid taking responsibility for their words. Apparently, ours is not the first generation to act this way. It seems the Pharisees and others in Jesus' day had a trick of their own. They had very specific words that had to be said to make an oath binding before God. My favorite example is if you said, I swear by Jerusalem that I'll be home for dinner, that oath was not binding. But if you said, I swear toward Jerusalem, that was binding. And you could be found guilty in a law court if you weren't home for dinner. There was an entire tract in the commentary of the rabbis, the Mishnah, that was given over to fleshing out all these details of oath-taking. And Jesus is not impressed. He is not impressed with their complexifying. In Matthew 5:33-37, he pushes back on their sophistry and teaches that deep righteousness, true integrity, is simply and plainly committed to truth-telling. Then in verses 38-42, he takes the subject of integrity even further, teaching that his people do not respond to evil or with revenge, but his people relinquish their rights and care for others. He teaches the kingdom people keep promises and relinquish rights. Let's begin with verses 33-37, the integrity of truth-telling. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. Verse 33 doesn't quote any one particular law of Moses, but it's a summary of several Old Testament precepts which require people who make vows to keep them. The vows in question are, strictly speaking, oaths, in which the speaker calls upon God to witness the vow and to punish him if he breaks it. And Moses emphasized the evil of false swearing and the duty of performing to the Lord one's oaths. Here are a couple examples. Leviticus 19:12. You shall not swear by my name falsely and so profane the name of your God. Numbers 30, verse 2. If a man vows a vow to the Lord or swears an oath to bind himself by a pledge, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. Deuteronomy 23. If you make a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay in fulfilling it, for the Lord your God will surely require it of you, and you will be guilty of sin. So these commands prohibit a lying vow. But in the face of this plain meaning, the Pharisees focused on the details of the vow, not the moral requirement of truthfulness and integrity. And it's that sophistry that Jesus pushes back against. In Matthew 23, he puts it this way, woe to you, blind guides, who say, If anyone swears by the temple, it is nothing, but if anyone swears by the gold of the temple, he is bound by his oath. You blind fools, for which is greater, the gold or the temple that has made the gold sacred? And you say, if anyone swears by the altar, it is nothing, but if anyone swears by the gift that is on the altar, he is bound by his oath. You blind men, for which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? So whoever swears by the altar swears by it and everything on it, and whoever swears by the temple swears by it and by him who dwells in it, God. Here in Matthew 5, Jesus similarly argues that however hard you try, you cannot avoid some reference to God in your oath, for the whole world is God's, and you can't eliminate him from any bit of it. So if you vow by heaven, it's God's throne. If you vow by the earth, it is his footstool. If you vow by Jerusalem, that's his city, the city of the great king. If you swear by your head, even though your head is not God's, it is his creation. It's under his control, and you can't even change the natural color of a single hair, black in youth, and for most of us moving toward white in older age. So the preoccupation with the formula and having the nuance of the formula to be able to avoid the vow, that was certainly not the point of the law. These vows that we take are binding regardless of the accompanying words. So that being so, the real implication of all these laws is that we must keep our promises and be people of our word and be truth tellers. Verse 37, do not swear at all, but rather let what you say be simply yes or no. As the Apostle James puts it later, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Anything more than this, Jesus adds, comes from evil, either from the evil of our hearts and its fundamental deceit, or from the evil one, whom Jesus described as a liar and the father of lies. But this strong stance on oath raises two questions. First, if swearing is forbidden, why has God himself sworn oaths in Scripture? Why, for example, did he say to Abraham, by myself I have sworn, I will indeed bless you? I think the answer is that the purpose of divine oaths was not to increase his credibility, but to reinforce and confirm our faith that God himself has promised something. Hebrews puts it this way. So when God desired to show more convincingly to the heirs of the promise the unchangeable character of his purpose, he guaranteed it with an oath, so that by two unchangeable things, himself and his oath, in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have fled for refuge might have strong encouragement to hold fast to the hope set before us. God swears these oaths to strengthen our faith. Second question, is this prohibition absolute? For example, should Christians, in order to be consistent in their obedience, decline to swear an oath in a court of law or on a legal document? The Anabaptists and the Reformation took this line. Most Quakers today still do, and our government does permit them to witness without swearing that oath. But last week, we saw that while we always take Jesus' words seriously, there are times when taking him literally is unwise or unnecessary. After all, Jesus himself, Matthew records, did not refuse to reply when the high priest put him on oath, saying, I adjure you, by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. Then Jesus, who had been silent, answered under that oath and confessed that he was the Son of God. But what Jesus is emphasizing here is that men should not need to resort to elaborate oaths. It wasn't that they should refuse to take an oath if it was required by some external authority. The application, rather, is clear, using phrases like, I swear I'll be home by 10, or I promise I'll never do that again, is, according to Stott, a pathetic confession of our own dishonesty. Or as A.M. Hunter says, oaths arise because men are so often liars. You take the oath to reinforce the idea that this time at least you're telling the truth. And what's sad is that we are often lying to ourselves, trying to convince ourselves that we'll do what we say when deep down we know we won't. Or we get so used to telling convenient lies that sometimes we don't even notice them. So we all probably need to turn up the gain on our internal lie detectors. When do I tend to lie? We lie to cover up selfishness. We lie to cover up a bad use of our time. We lie to cover up blowing our diet. We lie to impress. I remember the first time I realized this when I was a kid. For whatever crazy reason, I told my friends that I went to Maine every winter and lived in a cabin and trapped beavers or something. I don't remember what I said. I'm absolutely sure that no one in their right mind could possibly believe that lie, but I thought I was impressing them, making myself cool. Then I realized the lie was totally unsupportable, and finally I felt ashamed of it. But on some level, probably more sophisticated than that, the temptation to lie or exaggerate to impress people is still there, probably for all of us. Or we lie to hide our feelings and thoughts, our shallowness or our anger or our neediness. For example, what's wrong? Nothing. I mean, wouldn't it be better to respond with the truth like, I'm sorry, I was having a thought not worthy of expressing. Or, I'm grumpy, I'm just grumpy, I don't know why. Or, I'm thinking about something, but I'm not ready to talk about it. Or, I'm kind of down about something. Or, more boldly, yeah, I'm struggling, thanks for noticing. Can we sit and talk? Lying to avoid relationship is as bad as a false oath. But the third kind of lie that I hate in myself is when I make promises that I don't or don't even intend to keep. I'll send that email out. I'll look into that. I'll pray about that. And then at times I don't. I've had more than one occasion when I've promised something for Christmas or someone's birthday, something that had to be further prepared because it wasn't quite ready yet or was some future date. And I make those promises, and then I don't make them happen. And I hate it. I hate it when I make promises I don't keep. I promised Michael a skydiving trip a year and a half ago for his birthday, and it still hasn't happened. Jesus says to me, don't make promises that you can't keep. Let your yes be yes. Let your no be no. But compelling though this application may be, verses 38 to 42 take us to a whole new level of integrity. Stott says, the final two contrasts bring us to the highest point of the Sermon on the Mount, for which it is most admired and most resented, namely the attitude of total love which Christ calls us to show toward one who is evil, verse 39, and toward our enemies, verse 44, which we'll get to next week. He says, nowhere is the challenge of the sermon greater. Nowhere is the distinctiveness of the Christian counterculture more obvious. Nowhere is our need of the power of the Holy Spirit, whose first fruit is love, more compelling. So Jesus teaches here that rather than retaliating, we need to be empowered by the Holy Spirit to give up our rights, and often even our stuff. Matthew 5, 38 to 42. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. Verse 38 comes straight from the law of Moses. from Exodus and Leviticus and Deuteronomy. It's called the lex talionis, the principle of exact retribution. And it really is the foundation of justice. It specifies the punishment that is comparable to the crime for a wrongdoer. Second thing it does is it limits the compensation of the victim to an exact equivalent and no more than that. So it defined justice, it restrained revenge, and it prohibited the taking of the law into one's own hands. Because the law says, you shall not take vengeance or bear any grudge against the sons of your own people. But, Stott says, the scribes and Pharisees apparently extended this principle of just retribution from the law courts, where it belongs, to the realm of personal relationships, where it does not belong. They tried to use it to justify personal revenge. This principle, judicial retribution, was used as an excuse for the very thing that it was instituted to abolish: personal revenge. So, verse 39, but I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. Now notice this. Jesus does not say, do not resist evil. We know we're to resist temptation and evil and really everything that flies in the face of godliness. We're told over and over to resist the devil. But this word is an evil one. We're not to resist or take revenge on the evil person who seeks to do the evil to us. Notice that Jesus doesn't deny the person may be evil. He asks us not to pretend that he's other than is, nor to condone his evil behavior. But what he says to us is we are not supposed to retaliate. This thought, this personification of it to a person, saves us from the ways the verse has been misapplied. Some pacifists have used it to justify total non-retaliation by individuals and states, so that an individual must not resist the person attacking his loved ones, and a nation must not resist the country that invades it, nor even protect her people. But if the verse is not about resisting evil, but about how you show love in Christ to even evil persons, then our understanding and our questions change. Jesus is not talking about leaving the innocent and the helpless vulnerable to evil. He is talking about the gentleness and love which allow his people to overcome evil with good, as the Apostle Paul would put it. The key to that, as seen in each of Jesus' 4 illustrations, is the willingness to give up our own personal rights. There are, he says, many situations, some of them quite uncomfortable, where we have a right to push back on someone's demands, but we choose to give up our rights for the sake of love, service, and witness. Remember what Jesus said, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. It's for witness. And I love this idea of giving up rights, because we're so bound to rights in our culture. So a few weeks ago we said that anger comes when expectations are thwarted. This is the other side of the coin. This is the conscious choice, not just to forego what we expected, but to give up what we have a right to expect. For 3 years after Harvey, Rich Global Crisis Response hosted teams in our building, a few folks here today, and every Sunday they would do orientation for the new team. I attended those often, and my favorite part of the presentation was 2 slides called The Release of Rights, which asked the team members to give up their rights to things like a comfortable bed, familiar food, seeing results, control of myself, or being able to make my own schedule, control of others, control of circumstances, making decisions, being successful, being understood, being heard, being right. Give up those rights. And instead, the next slide said, entrust yourself to God. Entrust all these circumstances to God. So not resisting an evil person in the examples Jesus gives is all about giving up my rights. That's not something our culture will teach us to accept. But hey, this is a countercultural, counterintuitive, upside-down kingdom that Jesus is calling us to. So how would we apply this command? As we said earlier, we don't necessarily apply the commands literally, although we don't avoid a literal application if it presents itself. But even if we do not take these examples literally, we do take them seriously. We think about them, preferably daily, and we apply them with wisdom. We want to apply these commands. We want to apply the illustrations wisely. And we want to do that without using the word wisely to wiggle out of the seriousness of these demands. So first, if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. I'm very left-handed. A right-handed person slaps the right cheek with the back of his hand. And in the Middle East, even today, this is considered the greatest insult. To then turn the other cheek means being willing to accept reproach, being willing to accept unjust reproach without retaliation. This is what Jesus did. It had been written of him in Isaiah, I gave my back to those who strike and my cheeks to those who pull out the beard. I hid not my face from disgrace and spitting. When he was arrested, the Jewish guard spat on him, blindfolded him, struck him in the face. The Roman soldiers crowned him with thorns, jeered at him, knelt before him in mock homage, spat in his face, struck him with their hands. And Jesus, Stott says, with the infinite dignity of self-control and love, held his peace. He's our example. Peter says, Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example so that you should follow in his steps. He committed no sin, neither was deceit found in his mouth. When he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly. Jesus was not a weakling. His self-control, his love for others were so powerful that he was able to reject every form of retaliation in order to suffer for us. There's an old preacher story that illustrates this on a much more ordinary level. Renowned preacher Charles Spurgeon and his wife would sell, but refused to give away, the eggs that their chickens laid. Even close relatives were told, you may have them only if you pay for them. And as a result, some in this huge congregation labeled the Spurgeons as selfish and greedy people. And the couple accepted the criticisms from their community for years without ever defending themselves. They never struck back. It was only after Mrs. Spurgeon died that the full story was revealed. The Spurgeons had used all the profits from the sale of eggs to support several elderly widows in the community. Because they desired their giving to be known only to God, they endured these attacks in silence. They gave up their right to be understood and appreciated. Verse 40. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. It was possible in that day to sue others for the very shirts on their backs, their tunics. However, it was illegal to take full possession of another's cloak permanently. The cloak, the outer robe, was indispensable for living in the climate of Palestine. So even if you lost your shirt, your tunic in court, when your opponent asked for your cloak, and even if you won it, he had to give it back to you every evening for you to sleep in. That was the law. Jesus, now giving advice to the poor among his followers, says, as they sue you for your shirt and win it, give them your cloak too, even though they cannot legally take full possession of it. And this is radical. This is supremely radical. It's giving up our rights. And yet Jesus implies that good will result. Reminds me of a legal situation that Gail and I were in for many months with our family, where the court ruled against our desires time after time, but somehow God allowed words to be left in those court documents that enabled us to comply with the court and come out better off in the family situation, closer to our actual goal, time after time. God blessed our willingness to submit in that situation. Verse 41. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. The word forces is from a Persian word. The Persians had a kind of a pony express, where they would commandeer a horse whenever the horse they were riding got tired, and they would use that horse until it got tired. The Romans modified this. Whenever a Roman official or a soldier asked anyone within the whole Roman Empire to carry a burden for 1 mile, that person had to do it, regardless of who he was. Almost all the Jews had been subjected to this, and they hated it. Jesus says, with willful cheerfulness, you do more than you're asked to do. It's a revolutionary response in a difficult situation. And maybe it's the kind of response that would cause a hardened Roman soldier to say, what's up with this guy? This person has something I don't understand. If you show off long enough, people start asking questions, and this is the way that Rome was ultimately converted to Christianity, was by the humble service of believers. So how can you and I go the 2nd mile? Pretty simple, I think. Find a way to do what you're supposed to do, and cheerfully, something more. Simple examples. If you have to wash the dishes, clean the counter. When you go to the grocery store, don't just buy what's needed, but bring home something as a surprise. If you take a meal to a friend, don't just bring the meal, but bring flowers too. Don't just help your child with their homework, but write an encouraging note to the teacher. Do something extra. That's the extra mile, not just the 2nd mile, it's the extra mile that we can go to show love in people's lives. Finally, verse 42. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. This last command needs no cultural context. We still live in a world where some want to beg and some want to borrow, and it's easy to see how we could impoverish ourselves if we gave in to every request. This is where the wisdom comes in, and the love. Give to the one who begs from you, if by giving to them you can do them real good. Brian Fickert and Steve Corbett wrote a book called When Helping Hurts that laid out the difference between giving that does someone really good and just perpetuates poverty. But the interesting thing to me from that book was that the kind of giving that does someone good was also harder. It was the hardest kind of giving because it was not just a little money, it was time, it was energy, it was relational investment. Jesus' do not refuse here is not calling us to give or lend in ways that would hurt a person and perpetuate their struggles, but to invest in loving ways, including investing our time, our money, our energy, and our relational capital. Stott says it this way, and this is really good. We cannot take these 4 little cameos with wooden, unimaginative literalism. This is partly because they are given not as detailed regulations, but as illustrations of a principle, and partly because they must be seen to uphold the principle they illustrate. The principle, he says, is love. The selfless love of a person who, when injured, refuses to satisfy himself by taking revenge, but studies instead the highest welfare of the other person and of society, and determines his reactions accordingly. He will certainly never hit back, returning evil, for he has been entirely freed from personal animosity. Instead, he seeks to return good for evil. Stott says he's willing to give to the uttermost his body, his clothing, his service, his money, insofar as these gifts are required by love. Thus, the only limit to the Christian's generosity will be a limit which love itself may impose, when giving is not the loving thing to do anymore. Who do we look to as we close for examples of this kind of living? Many of you have not had the privilege of knowing Novella Denny, who doesn't get to church anymore, especially with COVID. She took fall recently. So she was married to Marvin in 1946, and for more than 7 decades has poured herself out for Marvin and for her children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and I believe great-great-grandchildren. She's loved them and has been primary caregiver for several of them in each generation. Furthermore, for decades, she cared for every baby in the nursery, and by extension for every family in the church. She has poured herself out unselfishly. So the way I would say it is that Novella has gone so many second miles that you can't even see where she started from. That's the amazing picture of what it looks like to be Jesus to other people. We could talk about others in our generation, from Mother Teresa to Chuck Feeney, the philanthropist you never heard of. Chuck Feeney gave away $8 billion while living in a side street in a Midtown Manhattan apartment, buying his clothes off the rack. For other philanthropists, he coined a phrase, giving while living. And he's still alive, but he's given it all away. Or we could talk about my favorite fictional character, Lem Warren, who endured derision and insult from everyone who should have loved him, his mother, his wife, his daughter, but who returned good for evil over and over and poured himself out to care for them and for everyone who came into his world. I am resisting the temptation to tell the story again. Go read it. It's public domain, online, in memory of L.E.W. But Lem Warren is who I want to be when I grow up. That's who I want to be when I grow up. Any one of these people, actually. I'm sad that I'm 64 years old and I haven't gotten to this place of reflecting Jesus through that kind of selflessness. But it's this upside down, self-forgetting, other-centered wisdom of Jesus that tells us how to really live, how we really want to live, by keeping promises and relinquishing rights so that we can bless other people. This is hard. This seems impractical. This is the real deal, folks.